Blake Leath. Welcome to the Gratitude Series, GTS, Episode 4. I'm going to talk today a little bit about peace. I have been just interacting, with a number of people in the last few months, and there's just such a restlessness out there. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, worry. It's in some cases anger, rage, and we could explore it from a lot of different angles. But I think what's been on my mind mostly around peace of late is sort of two flavors, two varieties. So in this episode 4, I want to explore pursuing vocational peace, a sense of peace about what it is that one does for a living or for the next season, the next stretch of 2, 3, 5 years, however long it might be for an individual. And then in episode 5, we'll pivot to exploring relational peace. And I will share some specific individuals for whom I am thankful. Sylvia Lavoie will be one, so I'll tell you a little bit about Sylvia. And Susan Thomas is just an equally incredible person. Mary Ober, Lou Romero, Dr. Steve Buchholz, and even a late great uncle, my late great uncle Ruth Bynum. So I'll share just a little bit about those individuals or individuals like those. I think when I reflect on, the last few years of unrest, if you will, anxiety, volatility, just in the world, in workplaces, for sure, in families, absolutely in the body politic and in communities and in all sorts of just regional internecine conflicts. I just find so much unrest. So I'll focus primarily first in this episode on the vocational piece. And I think right now, to begin, I'd like to speak a little bit to the young people, to folks that are in their teens or that are in college or in vocational school or trying to figure out what it is that they want to do and be and go. I find, so I'm 53, and it probably wasn't until my mid-40s, really, that I started having sufficient time in the rearview mirror to reflect on how I had come to do what I do and whether I love it or not, and if I wanted to do it differently or do something else, and have, like many people, yourself included, I'm sure, questioned and considered other things, right? So I think that unrest is normal and healthy, and I do love visiting with people that are mentoring me, coaching me, feeding me, and for whom I perhaps have the opportunity to do the same when we have these dialogues about are we on the right path? Is this still what we want to be doing? Is this how we want to spend our time, however much time we have, right? So specifically, I think now that I have that prism more in the rearview mirror, I think the 3 things that are difficult for young people, at least from my point of view, are vocation, location, and relation. So I feel like they're making decisions about 3 of the most important, impactful, and in many cases permanent decisions when they're perhaps least equipped to do so. I don't know that I knew when I was 18 or 19 or 20 what I wanted to do for the next 20 or 30 or 50 years. There were things that I, like any of us, was good at or that came easy, and then there are things that were just virtually impossible. And, so that shuts a lot of doors, right? But when I think about vocation, right, so that comes from the Latin vocare, to call. And so historically, we have this notion that I might feel called to do something. In that case, particularly, it was, ministry, because it derives from, a deep Catholicism and so forth. But nevertheless, to be called is a really powerful thing, right? So I spend a lot of time just reflecting on, my own sense of calling, to the extent I might think I have one, and what it is that the people that I'm across from, the table with might feel is theirs. So I know that it's really hard for a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old person to have much certainty on that. And, and if they're in college, they're picking a major, and if they're not, they're committing to a job or whatever the case is. And, it's just hard. So I think if I have advice for young people, it would be to try not to stress about it so much, because in all reality, these things are not particularly permanent. Most people migrate through 9 or more jobs, and in some cases 2, 3 or more careers, right? If one is fortunate to live long enough to be able to have the time to actually do all that. But I'll have some questions at the end of this episode 4, to help dial in on how one might choose a vocation, or at least the kinds of questions that are reflective questions that help guide or provide some sense of a compass, of a true north. I think that's a big thing. Finding your true north, so that you say, these are the talents that I have. This is pulling me, right? This really is something I enjoy, and so forth. We'll get into that detail in a minute. So vocation, right? That's hard when you're young. So if you change your majors 2 or 3 times, or you drop out and you go back, or you don't go back, or you didn't go in the first place, you want to do something different, that is fabulous, right? I think we live in a time and age where a lot of people are fortunate to have that opportunity. And if they're not, and it's difficult, then you just run and you just keep running. And so I'll talk a little about perseverance in our December series. But nevertheless, location. I am a big believer in folks, trying other places, right? And so I always encourage young people, be thoughtful about your roots and the relationships with family and all those kinds of things. But it's a lot easier to do things when you're young, perhaps, than it is when you're older. And I know a lot of people that I've coached that had really great ambitions and plans for retirement that never came, because tragically they passed too early, or something happened to them physically where they were not able to enjoy their retirement. There's a great quote, men tire themselves in pursuit of rest. And that is absolutely true. A lot of us endeavor and endeavor and endeavor and exert and are effortful and save and do whatever it is that we think we need to do to be good stewards of our time and resources and talents, and then and then things get cut short, right? So I'm a big proponent of, if you want to live in the mountains, go try living in the mountains. If you want to live by the ocean, find yourself the ocean. These things are out there, and I'd rather people not regret. So just be thoughtful about location. I'm also a really big believer in sense of place. There are, for each of us, places that sort of feel like home and that call us and summon us. There's so many beautiful places in the world, and I love visiting a lot of them. And I'll find myself in a particular area, and I'll think, wow, I could live here. I could love this, right? And it gives me a deep sense of place, of connection, of history. Gosh, sometimes even purpose, right? This is a hardworking community, and they've got this incredible legacy and this past, and it's powerful, and I want to be part of that, right? So anyway, be really thoughtful about location. When I'm mentoring young people, I'll ask them, literally, imagine for me a day, walk me through a perfect day for you 5 years from now. What's the weather? What's the altitude? What's happening? And get pretty literal, because a lot of times they really haven't been exposed to all those places, much less thought about what it would be like to have a vocation in that particular location, right? And then the third thing that I think happens a lot for people that are really young, that's hard, is they get deeply committed in a relationship, and sometimes that's not the perfect relationship for them, right? And so I would just suggest, don't rush. I know that there are times, as was the case with me, when I met my wife, I knew in the first few minutes that I met her that I hoped that someday I would earn the privilege to be her husband. And that was in just the very beginning, right? So we all have those, but then I also know a lot of people that force things, and they force it. They want They want to have their vocation figured out. They want to have their location dialed in. They want to have their significant other. And, they're hastening. And sometimes that can be, really, really tragic, because you find people that are not compatible. They're not happy anymore. And it's because they made some decisions when they're not particularly equipped to do it. Some people are old souls, and I think they're ready to do that really early. Our daughter, I continue to be impressed by her, and I am biased, but it is true, just objectively. She was about 7, and I'd gone up to her room and was putting her down for the night, and reading and all that other stuff. And she said, "Daddy, is this all there is to life?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Sitting in a plastic chair and listening to an adult talk at me all day." I thought, wow, you're 7. I'm in trouble. I'm doomed. I do not know that I have the bandwidth or the skill to meet her where she was when she was 7. But nevertheless, I think those 3 things are important, right? So vocation, location, and relation. And don't rush. I love this quote. I think it's very true. I feel like it is not the was that creates a lot of distress for us in changes in life, and it's not necessarily the will be. It often is the is. So I think of it as the is bridge, right, or the is chasm. There is this nebulous, squishy, indeterminable period of time between what I knew historically and what I hope to know in the future, in which everything is ambiguous. And so I do feel like sometimes young people rush those particular decisions because they want to try to close that gap in the bridge, right? And I do feel like whether it's a gap year or trying to live somewhere else and do something for a while and then going back and continuing or whatever the case is. I mean, I do think those are genius moves, because oftentimes it helps us dial in on how we want to spend, the remainder of whatever the time is, the next 5 years or 10 years or something. And then, maybe shift to something else. So it's difficult, right? Because that's where we've been for the last almost 3 years, is in a lot of this in between, right? So post-normalcy, pre-normalcy, in the middle of the pandemic, how long does this last? What are the consequences long term? What's it doing to a generation or more? And that is a difficult season. The mind, the human mind, does not like uncertainty and ambiguity, and closes it really quickly. It abhors a vacuum, as does nature. So it will connect dots and make presumptions and try to close that gap fast. And that's where we get to biases and, people rushing to judgment and judging books by covers and all those kinds of things. Or in these cases, choosing what you want to do and where you want to do it and who you want to do it with the rest of your life in a matter of 2, 3, 4 years or something when someone is 20. So nevertheless, I appreciate the distress, right? So there's 2 kinds of stress, right? There's distress and eustress, right? So distress is obviously negative and problematic and can be harmful to one's health and mental health as well. And then eustress is positive stress, right? So EU from the Greek, and it makes everything as a prefix positive, right? So like euphoria, eulogy, euthanasia, eureka. Eustress. So in life, there's distress and there's eustress. And the hope would be that what we choose to do vocationally and where we choose to live and with whom would create more eustress than distress. Now, sometimes we go through seasons where we have neither. So we have neither distress or eustress, and that can be a depressive state, and that can last for a period of time or be related to something else, right? But it's not abnormal. It's incredibly common. But again, the mind does not like it. So it's a difficult season. Now, I love this quote from Stephen Covey. Give salespeople a quota, and the good ones will scamper up every tree in search of coconuts and chop down all the rest. But give a strategic salesperson a quota, and they'll first ask, are we on the right island? So I think this is a great way to think about when one is pondering, the vocation and the location and the relation. Am I doing the thing that I feel called to do in the world or to be in the world? And again, it might take until you're 45 to decide that, or you might do something until you're 45 or 50 and then decide to do something entirely different. That happens all the time. So remember that song, Always Wear Sunscreen? It wasn't a Baz Luhrmann song, but he's the one that was famous for mixing it. It was based on a Washington Post article or something, but nevertheless, just a great song. And, I think a lot of times we wonder, am I doing the right kind of thing? And in that song, he describes, that ambiguity and talks about some of the most interesting people. Well, this is the author that wrote the post, right? But she talks about, in the original editorial, or the column was, that some of the most interesting people are the ones that didn't know what they wanted to do, be, go, contribute, etc. And again, we're the most interesting people in the world and might have changed their minds halfway through, right? So that happens all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. It's life, right? We're evolving. We're discarding. Windows are closing. Other windows are opening. And that's fabulous. That's a process of evolution and maturity. Now, I'd love to tell you about a great book. It's one of my favorites. Now, it's an older book, but let's not hold age against it. It's a classic. But a very successful executive named Bob Buford, who would be fun to Wikipedia if you're interested, wrote a really cool book called Halftime. And it was really helpful for me, but it has been helpful. It's sold, 2.5 million copies, I would think. But the notion of halftime is this epiphany, if you will, where a lot of us spend the first half of our career or thereabouts. It could be all the way up to middle age, but let's say it's not quite that long, but nevertheless, it's about 40 or 35. Spend the first portion of our career credentialing, right? Credentialing. So, man, I feel like I got to go learn this thing, and I got to do that thing, and I got this thing, and I got to have this thing, and all that. And that's all fine and good, right? Because a lot of people feel that they need that in order to, have opportunities or to advance or be at peace with themselves or feel like, I knew I could do it, and so I wanted to do it. And, use the talents that were given to me. So I think that's great. But all that can become, right, a bit of a hamster wheel. So, I'll be happy when, right? I'll be happy when this happens. I'll be happy when that happens. I'll be happy when, and sometimes people get materialistic, right? So I'll be happy when, I make this much money, or when I have this car, or I have that house, or whatever. And of course, the people that promise themselves happiness in a future attainment, in a future state, are the people I find in life who are never happy. Because they're trying to fill something with the wrong kind of stuff, right? Money doesn't buy love, and it doesn't buy happiness. And of course, a lot of people say, well, try me. But there are a lot of really fabulous, fabulous is they're accurate and they're sobering, they're chilling, they're haunting. So not fabulous, but really powerful quotes about people that win the lottery and what comes of them. And so, there are, I don't know if I can remember all three of them, but there are these, Chinese curses, right? And may you live in interesting times is the first of the three. And the other one is something about may the people in power come to know of you, I think is what it is, right? So, and then the other one is, may you get all your heart's desire. And of course, all three of those, we think initially maybe those are good, when in fact they are curses. So anyway, I think there are people who chase the wrong things, and then find at the end of it that it's vapid and it's hollow and it's empty and it's not. It's just dissatisfying, right? Anyway, we could do that. Let's do that in December. in the next series where we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivators and hygiene factors and all those kinds of things. But Bob Buford, in his book Halftime, he talks about at some point, folks, it dawns on them. It dawns on each of us, perhaps. And if it does, what a fortunate blessing. Because for some people, it may not dawn on them until it's too late, or whatever, or at all. But the dawning is that, okay, I did all the credentialing jazz, and I chased all these things to reach some sense of peace, or whatever, or to be an accelerant in my career. That they might fuel my career in some way, having these things, these credentials. And then it dawns on me that maybe life is not about succeeding, or at least being successful in sort of the way the world judges success. And so halftime is that moment, that season, that however long it lasts in one's life, of the dawning, after which we come to the realization that it's not about succeeding, it's about signifying. It's not about success, it's about significance, right? So how do I go out and do something that is significant, that is meaningful, that is lasting, that is the tide that raises all boats, that somehow buoys and benefits other people? Sort of this benevolence era, if you will, after credentialing. So a cool thing that Bob talks about in that book is, he says, think of it this way: in the first half of our careers, we often live for our resume. And after halftime, we live for our eulogy. And I love that. I love that. I love when I meet people who have just gone through that epiphany. People who have succeeded and achieved whatever it was that they wanted to experience at the top of the mountain. And then they get to the top and they realize that it is dissatisfying, and that it doesn't quench their thirst, and that it doesn't scratch their itch, and that it doesn't solve their problem. And so now what? Wow. I saw a great speaker, Clint Bruce, the other day, and he was just absolutely phenomenal. And if he sees this, hey, Santa Seal, how are you doing? But, he talked about, when he graduated from college and, they won a bowl game and he's hoisting up the trophy and he got really emotional, and, his teammates asked, why are you so emotional? He said, now what? I mean, I've been working my whole life for something like this, and I've done it, and I don't know that it satisfies me, so now what? Now what indeed? So Clint Bruce went off and became a Navy SEAL, and then of course after that, now what, right? So now he's helping people who are in many cases coming out the other side of halftime, right? So anyway, just as you're thinking about those shuns, the location, and your vocation and your relation and relationships and so forth. Also thinking about significance, fine. If you want to go get credentialed, that's great. I'm a champion of that, and, believe that we don't want to unlive our potential, but at the same time be really thoughtful about what's on the backside, the significant side, beyond just your own achievement, your own success. So I coached a gentleman I just love, and I've known him for a really long time, since like 1996. And at the time he was a very young engineer, and I was only 4 or 5 years older than him. But nevertheless, here we were at a table, and I'm visiting with him and doing like an intake, right, to coach him and so forth. And he was just incredibly smart and a bit hyper, a bit manic, very tightly wound, a ball of energy. His mind just races at 2.5 speed everybody else's. And so, he was entertaining and a real joy, and a sweet guy. I mean, a really fabulous human being. I really liked the guy. But he had this emptiness that he wanted to fill with achievement. And so he went off and did that for a very long time. And he accomplished everything that he wanted to accomplish. And I got a note from him just about a month ago, an email. And wow, talk about powerful. We spend a lot of times in our coaching dialogues talking about family. And he sent me a copy of a letter that he had sent to his daughter, in which he encouraged her and got out of his own technical world, because he's a very technical person in a technical profession. And he spoke to her of interpersonal issues and spiritual issues and encouragement issues. It was a dialect, a language that was anathema, foreign, alien to him when I met him. And he had just committed himself in his life's journey to try to pump up those interpersonal capabilities. And he did it, and he exemplified them in this letter to his daughter. And it blew me away. It blew me away. Because he changed her life. She changed his, but they changed each other's, and they made each other better. And when I read the letter, I was really proud. What he sent to me, he said, "Hey, I just wanted you to see, my progress." And I share that as an example of what I describe as the power of the pivot. The pivot from the success era to the significance era, and just how transformational and profound it can be in the life of somebody. So I'm going to read you a quote here. This is an email that I got from a gentleman probably about 4 years ago, right before the pandemic, and he was retiring. So he was 65 at the time, and we had a really powerful an email exchange, and he was a mentor of me. He was so much older than me, that when I first entered his organization, I was coaching some people in his organization, but he was he was the buyer, and he was really mentoring me, and I'll be indebted forever because he's an incredible human being. But we had a dialogue, an exchange by email, and he asked me about a learning experience that I'd gone to, and he said, "Hey, tell me about it, and what are the highlights?" And I shared, and let me read you what I shared with him. Essentially, hey, I learned to value these things that for me were anathema or foreign or alien, and I hadn't really incorporated them in my software, right? And he says, let me read it. "I wish I would have learned earlier in my career that I am here to help others reach their potential by supporting, coaching, challenging them to do things they thought not possible. I also wish I would have learned to listen versus to rebut at a much earlier point in my career." This is a beautiful email, and it's not unlike the story I just shared about the person that was very technical, that then came to value the interpersonal. So this is an individual who is a high achiever, very well respected. A really incredible human being. Just great. And a lifelong learner, right? Who at 65 is telling me, I wish I would have learned these things earlier. What is he telling us there? He is telling us not only that he made that pivot, no duh. He's also talking to me a little bit about what I describe as the difference between being a transmitter or a receiver. I find a lot of us, if we're not careful, we're transmitting. We are telling and sharing and informing and directing and acknowledging people to death, and and they're just silent and they're receiving it, right? And he's talking about turning that phenomenon around, hey, now I'm a receiver dish, right? And I'm going to listen. I'm going to be a sounding board. I'm going to be an encourager. I'm going to ask you provocative questions, and that's where this guy got. Gentleman would be a better word. That's where this gentleman got. Yeah, he had moved in his life from the succeeding, to signifying, and what he came to signify was someone that was a champion of everybody else, and just no ego. And I love that. I think we have to shrink sometimes so that other people can grow. So I'm gonna recommend a couple of books right here. So I've got a really dear friend named Clay Morgan, and every time we do something together, he's a really phenomenal presentation expert, and he always uses this quote when he's encouraging people to have better communication skills. Like how does one do that? And one of the little tiny phrases that he has is listen with your eyes. I love that. Listen with your eyes. I'm not particularly great at making eye contact, so I have to be thoughtful about that, right? And so every time I'm interacting with Clay and I watch what he does when we're doing virtual things or face-to-face, I mean, he is dialed in, and I love that. And that phrase comes from a book by Alda, and it's called If I Understood You Would I Have This Look on My Face? The subtitle is My Adventures in the Art and Science of Relating and Communicating. And I believe he did a lot of work at Stony Brook, Alan Alda did, and I feel like this book was the outcome of what he experienced there with the medical doctors and how they came to learn the power of listening. But that's a really great book. Another great phrase besides listen with your eyes that is really impactful for me in this receiving realm is Michael Bungay Stanier and the coaching habit. And his phrase is stay curious longer. And someone that I was being coached by said, Blake, stay curious 3 questions longer. That's a long time, to ask more questions. But I love that and how powerful it is. I have to stop myself. I mean, I literally do. I have to stop myself every day, catch myself, and, okay, Blake, you need to shut up. Imagine the seesaw, right? Try to get way over here so that the other when I was young, like when I was 8 or 9, I had a neighbor named Tommy Lott, and we had just moved in. We had just moved in, and we became friends and so forth on the little block there, the neighborhood. And one afternoon, I came home and my mom said, how was your day? And I said, great. And she said, how's Tommy? And I said, great. And she said, what do you like about him so much? And I started to describe our afternoon together, him and me in the backyard or whatever. And she said, it sounds like you like him because he listens to you. Just make sure that you let Tommy talk. Okay. All right. So we're talking about, me being, 8 or 9 or 10 years old, perhaps, and still working on it, right? But it's a great object lesson to have this email right here in front of me from this person that gentleman that I respect so much, and for him to share, gosh, just with such humility. I wish, Blake, that I had done this earlier, come to value people's potential. Yeah, not rebut. Yeah, I know a lot of people that love to argue, and life's not an argument. I mean, there are things every now and then that we gotta fight for, but it's not an argument. So I feel like these things that I've just talked about, this interpersonal versus technical, receiving versus communicating, this is not dissimilar from what Brené Brown talks about at length about being vulnerable, right? You're getting out of your sphere of prowess, your technical prowess, or your your vocation, or whatever it is that you got degreed in and credentialed in, and you're saying, hey, can we talk about feelings? Or relationships? Or conflict? That is a very different realm for a lot of us. And so I have great empathy, and everything that she's written is really beautiful, and it's a great reminder to be vulnerable, right? And to not come to the end of our career or our life with other people that were significant to us or with us, feeling like that maybe we weren't vulnerable and didn't show up in a relational way, like the gentleman I shared 2 examples ago, right, with the letter to his daughter. I mean, imagine if that transformation had not happened, what sort of unlived potential both he and she would have experienced. So I'll conclude with something pragmatic, right? Particularly for young people, but it benefits all of us. I mean, I experience people that are in their 50s, and we're going through these questions together, and they're still incredibly powerful, right? So as we ponder vocation, job fit, alignment, calling, those kinds of things, right? So this comes from Dr. Steve Buchholz, and he's just a really great friend and incredible author. So I just, go into Amazon and punch him in, Buchholz. And Steve has a lot of provocative questions around, careering, if you will, career orientation, and trying to align, our calling and our talents with what's out there in the world, right? So one of the questions he encourages people to ask themselves, is what do you value? What are your key values in life? The biggies, because if you're clear on those, it's a lot easier to rule things out and to rule things in vocationally. What brings you satisfaction? Or I would go beyond that, like outright joy, elation, euphoria, what kind of stuff you love doing, right? What are you doing when you're at your best? When I'm at my best, like I'm in the zone, I'm dialed in. What am I doing? Where when I'm in that task, time flies. I'm thinking 10 more minutes and there'll be 3 more hours, right? Because you're loving it. Top 5 strengths. Do we know our top 5 strengths? What are they, right? For what work do you receive the most compliments or praise? What do people notice about what it is that you do so well? And you find historically that that's not the first time you've been complimented on that particular thing. And then finally, what are the kinds of work, tasks, jobs, projects, assignments, etc., that energize you? You find that, man, you might have been kind of dragging wagon when you started, and then 30 minutes into it, you're juiced, you're flying, versus those kinds of tasks, activities, etc., that exhaust you. And maybe next month we'll talk about this relationally, because we all have people in our life in one realm or another that there are people that do energize us, and then there are people that do exhaust us. And so my advice would be to surround yourself with people who mostly energize and do not exhaust, and be really thoughtful about that, because otherwise you'll find yourself in a very bitter, toxic kind of a place where you're finding that everything you do is dysfunctional because it's multiplied times that person's dysfunction, right? A crazy maker, if you will. So we'll talk about that in the next episode, in episode 5, right? So I think I'll share a mantra, right? I think we all could benefit from having a mantra, something that it is that we, keep in front of us and that we do all the time, right? So my mantra is get busy, die empty and full, and leave it better than you found it. See you in episode 5.